Okay, hi.
Hi.
Thanks, gentlemen. Right, okay, so ReImagine Asia. So we were talking about this the other day, so I wanted to, hopefully, let's see if my PowerPoint, I'm an agency person, so I can't go anywhere without PowerPoint. So there we go. Okay, so the first one. So just to give some context, I think it's probably important to think about what does Asia actually look like and how has it changed? So if we go to the first one, right, so actually Asia is going to become a more important part of the world. Indonesia will be the 4th largest economy by 2030. By 2030, also 2 of 3 people in the middle class will come from Asia, and that's about 1 billion people. We've also got, Asian platforms on the rise as well. So TikTok already has 1 billion users and growing. And we also have a lot of technology now coming out of Asia. You think about super apps, you think about fintech, crypto, and NFTs. And in fact, a lot of research have shown that actually the biggest proportion of people who have experimented in the metaverse and bought NFTs actually come from Southeast Asia. So again, there's a lot of opportunity here and a lot of consumer experimentation in the future. So, is it time to reimagine Asia and rethink what we already know about it and what the future could hold? The answer is yes, of course. Right, so we're going to talk about 3 things, right? We're going to talk about consumers, we're going to talk about platforms, and then we're going to talk about some channels. So, let's kick off. Gerald, a lot of this conference is about the platforms and the technology, but from your standpoint, from the consumer point of view, how important is, particularly for your industry, less about the platforms, but more about consumer and culture?
Look, I think you can look at data and spreadsheets all day, but I think if you don't have the culture mindset, you're going to be missing a big part of consumer behavior in the start, right? So I think it's important to have that really culture mindset, understand the behavior of how people make decisions. If you're working for a bank, for example, and you're launching a digital bank, and then, the spending patterns, how people put their money, so on and so forth, it's all very culturally innate, and that's from a commercial standpoint. From a music standpoint, it comes from culture. If it's hip hop, if it's rock pop, that comes from storytelling that's really ingrained in the culture of a community, right? So I think it's super important to have that culture mindset, so don't lose sight of that, and then blend that together with that data or commercial mindset. I think you'll find a really nice sweet spot in marketing overall. Okay,
Chiro, as a global marketeer and 4 days in on your return back to Asia, what have you seen are the big differences between sort of the Asia consumer mindset and maybe the ones from Europe or the US?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, Helen, I think we should just look at it is that there is really no Asian consumer. And I think that's the big difference that we need to keep driving. And I think this approach of trying to de-average and disaggregate, because more often, if you start saying the Asian consumer, there is really no one Asian consumer, because, your consumer in China is very different versus your consumer in India. Within India, it's, if you look at from different states, for instance, it's very different. Within Southeast Asia, there is no one Southeast Asia. Each of the consumers is different. So I think the big difference I'd sort of say is that the need to constantly disaggregate and de-average when looking at consumers from this perspective, and not keep talking about the fact that there is an element of Asian. Of course, some of all of it, but at the end of the day, we need to keep having that mindset of disaggregating.
Okay, what sort of, because Unilever spans so many different brands and categories and markets, where do you go to sort of tap into cultural insight for the consumer, for the many consumers that your brands consume?
So I'm a little biased in this because having being in media, and I think media shapes cultures, beliefs. Media shapes society. So I think what people consume from a media perspective a lot of times shapes cultures and society. So, and I think that's the way we look at trends. So what are people watching? What are people listening to? How are people sharing stuff? What are their behaviors? And a lot of it is driven by media. So we look at media at a lot, as a source of insight in terms of what's really shaping that mindset.
Gerald, where do you go for, I mean, in the music industry, how do you tap into consumer trends? Where do you go to get, what's the next big thing?
Yeah, so it's very blended, I would say, right? If you're looking at broad trends, we have a lot of data that the company has, looking at insights, looking at where tracks are kind of peaking, what's trending, how the tracks, obviously, how the music kind of cross borders as well, right? What breaks in Indonesia might follow suit in Philippines and then eventually Singapore as well. So that's how we look at the overall trending. But a lot in the music industry, it's very A&R driven, so really working with artists and the community to make sure that we're close to them and identifying opportunities of where things are kind of bubbling and then really investing and really leaning into the artists as well. So that's how we kind of approach it, very blended in many, many ways. And I think that's the approach that in most of the work that we do, it's really that cultural mindset that really sets the tone on how do we develop products as well, right? I think besides music, even if it's in entertainment and in banking, for example, a lot of that data comes from a lot of research. When I was working in the banks, I was working in telcos, we did a lot of focus groups to understand consumer patterns. And from developing an app to making just the little things happen, that's all very innate in how a person interacts with the brand as well. So a combination of both.
Okay, so a lot of the data that both of you kind of referenced do come from platforms. So understanding whether it be your own platform, in terms of what consumers are listening to, et cetera, or third-party platforms, all the ones you know. What's interesting is, here's a question for you, Chiro, is that we obviously know the big global platforms, the Googles, the Facebooks, et cetera, but here in Asia, there are many, many, many other platforms, Neighbour, Line, Grab, WeChat, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think marketeers use those platforms enough for their insights?
So I think that's a very pointed question.
That's why it's pointed at you, Chiro.
So I think not as much, and I think that's where the opportunity is in terms of getting closer to some of these local platforms, local super apps, and getting a better understanding. And the good thing that happens with this is, and that's why I sort of referenced right up front in terms of the need to de-average and start looking at, start local up versus trying to look at global down, and get closer to the consumer, closer to what's happening, both from a media consumption perspective in the market itself. So I think there is definitely an opportunity. Seeing more of it right now over the last few years, especially post-COVID, seeing a significant effort for people to try and get closer to the local consumer. It sort of just makes much more sense. But of course, would love to see more of it.
Gerald, where do you go for, other than your own platforms, to sort of understand consumers? Where do you go for your insights?
Yeah, so obviously we work very closely with streaming partners, Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube Music, and we have great data from them as well, internal data as well. I think that we have our own kind of, we work with SoDEC, who is our kind of artist discovery channel, platform that we get all the data from. So that's how we get all the information, right? So if you look at channels, broadly from a social or a media perspective, right? In Asia, 80%, I was reading on some McKinsey report recently, 80% of channels or social channels are Western, like Facebook, Instagram, so on and so forth, right? And then, but a lot of people in Asia follow local influencers, so on and so forth. So the way we look at it, I think it's just really, really understanding how that data that we see on the really hardcore reporting and really kind of finding that the blend of like, okay, does that really translate into what we're seeing on ground, on social channels, or sentiment and comments and communities, what they're saying as well, right? So I think you get a lot richer and deeper insights by having a holistic view of data and just having that human interaction across the board. So that's how we generally look at identifying opportunities, even refining products, and just really, tightening up strategies overall. So that's how we look at it.
Okay. Chiro, do you see any differences in terms of some of the platforms. So we were talking, earlier around a lot of the, influencer marketing, you think social commerce and that sort of, which tend to be much more phenomenons here or in this side of the world versus, say, the US or indeed Europe. Do you think those things that we see here are going to become global, or do you think they are uniquely Asian and going to stay here?
So I think generally, I think there's a broad trend of convergence happening across. And when I look at convergence from a global perspective, what we're seeing is more and more, retailers becoming media owners and media owners becoming, retailers. So that's one element of convergence that's happening. There's another element which is really the creator ecosystem and things like, social commerce and, live commerce and stuff and all. I generally think that when you look at the media partners in this part of the world, I think they are fast tracking to commerce much faster than the other part of the world. Whereas in the West, I think it's more the retailers who are starting to become more media partners. So I think that's sort of a difference that I see, where I see that the media partners in this part of the world are being much more proactive in terms of integrating and trying to sort of bridge the gap into commerce and bring that in. And you can see that not only with the organized media partners, but even with the influence and the creator ecosystem. I think that entire trend of the creator commerce element, the social commerce and the live stream commerce is much faster and growing much faster in this part of the world than anywhere else. And I see that potentially moving into the developed markets very soon as an opportunity.
Gerald, what about for you in terms of looking at that sort of convergence of technologies or that fusion of marketings or that fluidity? So if you think about the worlds of super apps where actually consumers here can do everything, they can book their taxi, they can order a takeaway, they can stream video all in one place. Do you think that individual platforms are going to eventually merge into these, sucked into the world of super apps? Or do you think there's still going to be discrete platforms for different things?
Well, I think it really depends on the ecosystem that is evolving, right? You will have a combination, I feel. There will be companies who have big acquisition of customers already present that might evolve their product to be a super app and really kind of commercialize that even more, right? So I think I don't have a direct answer for that, but if it's kind of reimagine Asia, what are the possibilities of that, right? My sensing, it would be a combination, and it will be in different companies and apps or products will be in different stages as the progress of the growth happens. So that's how I look at it, and that's how Grab Taxi became Grab, right? And then you have the things evolving. But I still feel there will be a core group, and it's going to be very specific to certain actions or things that you want to kind of derive. But things will evolve, and I think that's the product strategy. So short answer to a long comment, it's still going to be a mix. I think it really depends on the product life cycle or where each brand or product is going to be.
But do you think that's going to be more prevalent here in Asia, or is there going to be an Asia phenomenon?
My sense is going to be Asia. I mean that's why we're here, right? I think it's going to be a huge growth. I think the speed of how things are evolving, the amount of investment coming to Asia, the amount of passion and the creativity coming out of Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, China is going to be really the driving force for the next leap of where things are. And just to kind of wrap up that point is, if you look at the McKinsey report, like 50% of consumer consumption, like potential consumption, is going to be in Asia. $10 trillion worth, $10 trillion worth in the next 10 years or so, if I'm not mistaken, is going to be in Asia. So yeah, I mean, without a doubt, it's going to be the place to be.
So I think the big thing, at least which I'm seeing in this part of the world is, what has really, made that change. And I think the entire thing on digital payments is what's really push that change in terms of the super apps and everything else on. Because if you've got the payments and the digital payments sorted, everything else can sort of build on top of that. And I think that is a big difference that I see, at least from this part of the world versus, say the US and Europe. The entire payment ecosystem. If you look at India, for instance, over the last few years, it's been transformational. And once you've got the payment bit sorted, I think it's just easier to build other services on top of that. And I see that being the sort of the big change element going forward. Yeah.
Okay, to that point then, but do you think that, and this is a kind of a convoluted question, but do you think that so many of the global marketeers are either based stereotypically either in London or in New York and look like me? Do you think they understand those nuances here?
I think there is increased attempt at trying to understand those nuances, and yes, I'm seeing that across in some of these markets, etc. Because in order for for brands to win, they need to win in developing and emerging markets also. And in order for them to win in this part of the world, you need to know the consumer, you need to know the ecosystem, you need to know the media partners and how business works in this part of the world. So there is an increased effort in terms of trying to understand the nuances which exist in this part of the world. So I think yes.
Okay, do you think that it's important that, or do you see a trend where more and more global CMOs are going to come from this region?
Yes, so I can talk about Unilever. So Samir, who's my boss, he's the CMO for personal care globally. He's based out of here, and he strongly believes in the power of the developing and emerging markets. So I think we will see more and more of that happening, because potentially this is where the growth is going to come from going forward.
Is that the same for the music industry? Well, in terms of growth, but also in terms of the appreciation that Asia is different, and they might need to have a different approach to how they build a business or build the growth in Asia versus the West.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, that's the message that we've been saying all this time, and I think I would see it as the shifting of the lens from, for example, the West, looking at Asia, and then Asia looking at the West, right? So I think it's going to be kind of flipping around, and that's how I see things kind of evolving overall. And that's the way we see things being kind of changing, and I think for sure Asia is going to be the next kind of area for growth. Okay,
so Chira, looking forward, coming back to Asia, I guess, what's the most exciting thing for you being back here?
I think just so my strong hope is that Asia becomes a net exporter of technology, net exporter of ideas, net exporter of creativity going forward. And I think, and I see that as an opportunity. And I'm doing a global role. I could have easily done that role from any part of the world. There was intention to be based in here, because I think the opportunity to learn, the opportunity to sort of look at the stuff that's happening here is significant. So for me, one hope is for this part of the world to be a net exporter of technology, creativity, ideas to the rest of the world. And I think, and hopefully in the next few years, we'll see more and more of that happening. We're seeing bits and pieces of it, but we'll see more and more of that happening.
Okay, do you think that for so long, the concept of Asia has been dominated by China, right, in terms of just its growth, its size, etc.? Do you see that changing slightly, either because of the economics or now looking at other markets inside Asia and reappraising actually who they are and what they contribute? Gerald?
Yeah, just kind of building off that point, which is like I see Asia, like the export kind of play, it's going to be a big area. You're already seeing it in music, like there's a label called 88 Rising, and it's primarily Asian artists, right? It's redistribute their music, and they were headlining Coachella, right? And so that kind of play is happening. You see a lot of Asian representation in movies like Marvel and all that. So the shift is happening. So to your point, I think Southeast Asia, I feel is going to be a big area, or North Asia as well, a big area of growth. China will be there, but due to certain situations that might be happening, it's also a competition, right? So how are we going to be competitively advantaged to kind of take over the advantage of the situation? So yeah, I see that big growth happening in Asia for sure.
Okay, so just final question for each of you. Gerald, what comes after K-pop? I'm really desperate to know, because K-pop's the big thing. So what's the next?
I wish I could predict the future, but I would say, you know, with how things, and this is my personal take, right? It's not, you know, anything official, but my personal take is artists from Southeast Asia becoming the next wave of artists is going to kind of be the movement. And you're seeing it in Coachella with 88 Rising and the artists there, mainly from the Philippines, Indonesia, China, right? So I do see that really bubbling, and I think that's a great opportunity for all Asian artists and in Southeast Asia as well. And I'm sure, you know, markets like China have their own thing. India has the amazing music scene as well. But in my view, it's Southeast Asia is going to be a next push, you know, next kind of momentum that you're seeing besides K-pop. And obviously you see K-pop dominating it right now, right? So. Okay,
and last question for you, Chiro. One of the areas around when we talk about Asia is we always talk about growth, right? And one of the changes we see now about growth is taking on multiple dimensions, right? So it's not just only about short-term sales, but there's, you know, things around good growth, which is sustainable, which is actually encompassing other aspects that consumers value for brands. And Unilever has definitely taken a stand in terms of the sustainability and building in a lot of those into its products, into its advertising, etc. Do you think that's as relevant here in Asia as it is to Europe and the West?
Yes, I think definitely yes. And I think one of the reasons is I think the level of consumer awareness in this area is going up, you know, significantly. And the reason why that's happening is because of the exposure. I mean, what the internet essentially, it's just democratized everything, right? So you have access to you know, stories and information from all over the world. And I think it all stems from the consumer. So I think the level of awareness of all of these issues is significantly growing in this part of the world. And the reason, and because it's growing, it's much more important for companies and brands to start embracing that and take that on as an opportunity, for sure.
Okay, well, that's it. So thank you both for joining me in terms of rethinking and reimagining Asia. I do think that for me, the challenges and the opportunities are tremendous in terms of looking forward. And I look forward to seeing Asia taking over the world very shortly. So thank you, and thank you.
Thank you very much.